Okay, we're going to shift gears now and talk more about some of the work that I've been doing at Stoneville on pre-tassel nitrogen. Got to get everything rearranged here, but you slide it over just a little bit. There we go. But you know, I've been working on this concept of pre-tassel nitrogen now for a good many years, and you know, I've done quite a bit of work on nitrogen management over the years on both cotton and corn, on rice in the early years, and several other crops over the years, including sesame right now. And you know, when I first went into the work with pre-tassel nitrogen, I was under the impression, which is what we learned in college, that that's too late to put out nitrogen on corn. Well, I went into the research with that in mind, and then the data said that's not true. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about some of the work that's been done, and then I want to get into a little bit about my philosophy towards the end of this. And I'm going to hurry through it because I got quite a bit here. But I came out of the Midwest. I actually was hired at Mississippi State to work on cotton and rice, and I'd never seen either one of those two crops grow before. So when I switched to corn, I became the resident corn expert because at least I'd seen that crop grow before. Now, some of the research that I'll be talking about was funded through the Mississippi Corn Promotion Board, so I always want to acknowledge them for the work. And we've already heard a little bit, Wayne covered a little bit about the right source, the right rate, the right time, and in the right place. And these, from a sustainability and from an environmental concept, these four concepts should hold true all the time, and no matter what the crop is, this is the framework for best management practices. Now, you know, the primary goals of fertilizer management is to match the fertilizer nutrients to the crop nutrient requirements. If the plant doesn't need nickel, which now we say nickel is an essential element, then there's no need to put it out there. But in certain cases, we know that the macronutrients, N, P, and K, and micronutrients are important. We want to make sure we manage that application timely. If we're putting nitrogen out on a crop that's not taking it up and you've got some weed issues out there, I promise you a weed's much more competitive than any cultivated crop we ever grow, no matter what it is, whether it's tobacco or sesame or watermelons, the weeds are more competitive. So, you know, keeping in mind that keeping the nutrients in the field is the key, because there's several things that happen to nutrients. The one we want is for the plant, our plant, to take it up and use it the way that we want it to. There's 5 basic questions. You know, is fertilizer necessary? There are cases where fertilizer applications are not necessary. If you've got, now I know you've heard a lot from these high yield growers and things, but you know, there are situations, if you've got 1,000 pounds of potash out there, soil test levels, I can almost promise you that if you add more, you get your money in my pocket if I'm a fertilizer dealer, because you won't return it. If you've got more than you need, if you're putting money in a bank and you never take money out of the bank, who wins? The bank. So in this case, the soil becomes that bank. And there are situations, if you've got extremely high potash, extremely high phosphorus, adding more fertilizer doesn't pay for itself. The probabilities of a response are 0. And so you've got to keep that in mind, but the only way you know that is you've got to have a soil test. You have to have that map to know. Now, fertilizer availability, plants utilize fertilizers at different rates. Early in the growing season, you have very little uptake. So you don't need a whole lot up front, but at the same time, you're priming that crop. Whether it's cotton, whether it's corn, whether it's grain sorghum. With grain sorghum, you need all the nitrogen out there by the 4 to 5 leaf stage, because that's when it determines the size of the head. Embryonically, that's the size of the head is determined that early. If you've got a deficiency, then you can reduce yields, even no matter how much nitrogen you apply, because it was too late. So we got to keep that. So when is really important. The best time, you know, that's what this talk's really about, is to to really get into the timing of some of these things. And no matter what the crop is, it doesn't matter. The same 5 questions are going to be important for every crop you grow. Now, some of the justifications that we have for doing the work that we've done, we know nitrogen is essential for corn growth. It's essential for most crops. Now, soybeans or other leguminous crops produce their own nitrogen. So the soil availability of nitrogen is not so critical because these plants produce their own. We know that nitrogen uptake in corn is fairly slow early in the growing season. We don't have much vegetative growth, so we don't have much of a demand, so the uptake's fairly slow. Once that plant gets past V5 to V6, that uptake starts up at a pretty sharp incline. Phosphorus uptake starts pretty steep increase, and so does potassium. If we put out all of our nitrogen out early and it starts raining, the transformations, denitrification, nitrification, denitrification, leaching in some cases, in our area in Mississippi Delta, that's not so critical, but other areas, it can leach through sandy profiles, it can run off the field. A lot of things can happen to it before the plant gets it. And the most environmentally sound practice is to put the nitrogen out at the time the plant needs it and can use it. And producers are always looking at a better way, but they're always looking to increase profitability. Now, there's several ways that we can look at things. We've done a lot of work on seeding rates. If you heard Dr. Henry talk this morning about seeding rates, when I came to Mississippi, we were growing dryland corn in the variety trials at 16,000 plants per acre. Now, is anybody growing 16,000 plants per acre? Nobody. What we have realized is we can go with higher plant populations. With irrigation, we're looking at plant population now, even on wide rows, up at 40,000. I've done quite a bit of work on twin rows and saw that 40,000 was still on the increase. Not every year necessarily, but in our area, we can, a lot of areas in the country have gone to 30-inch rows, down to 20-inch rows. Some of them are even looking at 15-inch rows now. In our bedded situation in the Mid-South, where we've got to be able to get water on the field and off the field, we're pretty much tied to beds to the most part. The narrower you put those beds and the bigger the tires you put down between them, the more compacting you've got to deal with. So, we've tried narrower rows, we've tried ultra narrow row cotton, but where are we today? Most of our cotton ground is still grown on 38 to 40-inch rows. So if you're rotating corn and cotton, most of our corn is still being on those wider rows. Now, one of the ways we found to address that is to go to the twin row production system, where we actually, if you've got 2 rows on a bed 10 inches apart, on 40-inch rows, you've got 30-inch rows in the middle. So you got 30, 10, 30, 10. So you got 30-inch rows, but we've still got that bed big enough that we can run water down through it and we can drive a tractor down through there. Spoon feeding. Spoon feeding, we know, is probably the best way to put it out there, but it's also the most expensive. Each time you make an application, you've got an application cost. So, yes, spoon feeding works, there's no doubt, but it's expensive, the way to go. And I've done quite a bit of work with pre-tassel nitrogen. And one of the things that when looking at pre-tassel nitrogen, what we have shown with the data is that we can get it into the plant and we can solve a problem if we have it. But my thing today is I want to try to get you thinking about your standard nitrogen application and using pre-tassel as an alternative if you've got a problem. We've done quite a bit of work. This is some work that was done both at Stoneville up at Verona, looking at nitrogen rates and looking at times of application from 100% pre-plant to 100% side dress. Looking at the data, this is data actually from back in 2009. There was at this, on the left is the Delta Research Extension Center at Stoneville. We saw a little bit of a response to nitrogen, but no yield increase above 180 pounds of N. Adding an extra 220 or 260 didn't give us anything. At Verona, that's a non-irrigated situation up in the hills. We topped out our yields at about 160. Numerically is a little bit more, but statistically there's not any difference. So in this case, adding extra nitrogen didn't give us any extra yield. If we look at the methods of application, now at Stoneville, in this particular year, 100% pre-plant was the lowest yield we had. The best yield, now this is 180 to 190 bushel corn, was with a 25% pre-plant and 75% side dress. There was no difference in those at Verona. Let's go to 2010, just out of curiosity. 2010, a different year, a little bit lower yields on corn. We got a significant response to 260 pounds of nitrogen. Took 269 pounds, in this case, gave us the highest statistical yield. Same thing at Verona, up to 240 pounds, different soil, not using as much nitrogen, but you see that stair step. The year before, we didn't see a response. This year we did. So the factors like the environment come into play here. You get a lot of rainfall, you get nitrogen loss up early. You know, those are pretty low yields, both locations. But if you look across the bottom, in 2009 at Stoneville, 25-75 gave us the best yields. 2010 it was 75-25, but look at 100% pre-plant. It's up better than any of them. It wasn't statistically different, but the year before it was statistically lower. Now why is that? That's a good question. Ask Mother Nature. She's involved here. So at Verona, again, it didn't make any difference where you put all the nitrogen out beforehand or afterwards. It didn't make any difference. You know, some of the work that we've been involved with the pre-tassel nitrogen, we've looked at N rates from, you know, we know that in situations in the field, if there's loss, and we have the potential to lose, if we start out with 240, we could lose up to half that nitrogen if we've got water standing or something like that. So we use a range of N rates here to look at these things, and this is what we've done here. So we've also looking at the pre-tassel rates from 20 up to 60 pounds of N. We started out from just 20 to 40. What's the minimum an airplane is going to put out in terms of urea? 100 pounds.
No, they'll put it out, they're just going to charge you for it.
They're going to charge you for 100 pounds. No matter what, they're going to charge you for 100 pounds. That's 46 pounds of N. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind because I'm going to show you some data. Okay, this is 2009. This is our nitrogen response here at the bottom. Say from 120 up to 280 pounds of N. We got that nice stair step. Statistically, there's not any difference between 240 and 280. Now this field, we have trouble getting water across this field, so these yields are fairly low for this particular field. But look at the pre-tassel nitrogen. Now that's averaged across all the N rates. We got a response to the first 20 pounds, but we didn't get a response to anything above that. Now remember that. Keep that in the back of your mind. Let's go to, now one of the questions we had when we saw this, because remember, I went into this thinking pre-tassel won't work, okay? I still got this in the back of my mind. Now I've got data that says it did. Well, where's it coming from? Well, if you look, this is actually seed weight. We call this seed index or 100 seed weight. This is weight of, actually of 3 subsamples of 100 seed. Okay, look what happens. This is 120 pounds of N in our system, applied 50% pre-plant, 50% side dress, 60-60. Look what happened here when we added the pre-tassel nitrogen. See the increase? This is the increase in seed weight. You see the same thing here, you see the same thing here. You don't see it as much out here at the far end, at the 240 to 280, but you still see some increase in seed weight. So either we're getting more density in the seed, but because we also saw an increase in the bushel test weight, which is a measure of the seed density. But you see here that where it's coming, it's not necessarily in more seed, but in bigger and denser seed. So this is 2010. Again, we see the stair step. Now this year we got much better corn yields here. Now this field is actually, half the field is in soybeans, half the field is in corn. So we're rotating back and forth between the two fields. So 2010, this was following soybean in 2009. Okay, we look, optimum yields there at 216. But again, if you look at the pre-tassel nitrogen, 20 pounds gave us a little bit, 40 pounds didn't give us any more. So, okay, we did this same thing in 2011. Same situation, again, 240 pounds of nitrogen is giving us pretty much our optimum yields. This time we added the 60 pound of N rate because the reason we did, because we had some producers wanting to go that high. So we added, but again in 2011, we got a bump between 0 and 20, but we didn't get anything above 20 pounds of N per acre. Now, this is averaged across all those N rates, but what you need to look at here at the lowest N rate, now the interaction here is not significant, But if you look at the lowest N rate, you see the greatest response, which is what you would expect. If you're going to get a response where you have the most limiting nitrogen is where you would expect to get the biggest response. When you get out here at 280 pounds of N, you don't see much response from adding the pre-tassel nitrogen out there. There's some, but statistically all those have an A with them, so there's not any difference between those. Over here, you've got K's and J's and G's, they're different. You know, because those letters are different, anything with a different letter is a difference in yield. But that's 2011, this is 2012. Again, you're seeing the same set of numbers. Basically 240 pounds of nitrogen on this particular field with 20 pounds of pre-tassel nitrogen is all it's ever taken. Getting any more than that may give us a little bit more yield, but it's not statistically significant. This is 2013. Again, good yields in 2013. We got 235 to 240 bushel corn yields. In this field, this is a silty clay loam field. So 2014, now 2014 again, okay, we've been going back and forth. All of a sudden in 2014, we saw no response whatsoever. You know, it didn't make any difference with pre-tassel. But what it appears in this year is we just, you know, 2014 was awfully wet at the beginning of the year. We had good rainfall throughout the growing season. So the pre-tassel nitrogen in that case didn't give us anything. So this is the 2011, 12, 13, and 14, yields. Okay, you see that the response up to about 240 pounds of nitrogen in most years is where it leveled out. Going on up didn't give us additional yield. So the way I interpret this is that nitrogen is not a limiting factor here. So I guess we're just about out of time, so I'm going to run through this real quick, the rest of it. You know, we've been doing this for several years. You know, we've also gone into looking at on-farm with looking at some of the varieties. You know, we see different varieties responding differently to nitrogen. This was in a farmer's field in 2011, 111-day corn, 211 bushels with 120 pounds of nitrogen following soybeans, but no response to nitrogen. We went up to 270 pounds. So this is an increase of 150 pounds of nitrogen. We got 3 bushel difference in yield. So that's not any different there. So we've started doing quite a bit of work with this in hand. Now, all of our pre-tassel work is a simulated aerial application, which means we put it out by hand. So we don't have an airplane that can fly plots yet. You know, some of these UAV things, that may be possible, but not right now. So, you know, we've looked at a lot of different varieties over the years. This is 113-day. On farm, again, these are in a farmer's field here. These are plots though, but they are on a farmer field. There's a response to nitrogen. This was the only variety that we actually saw a response to the pre-tassel nitrogen. We had that in there as a component. I'm gonna get to the summary here real quick. This is all the varieties in here. 1319 was the only variety that we saw a response to pre-tassel nitrogen in there. This is the actual amount of nitrogen that seemed to optimize yields on those fields. Adding additional nitrogen didn't give us any additional yield. So in this case where we went from 180 up to 270, there was a lot of wasted nitrogen there that we didn't need. It didn't increase our yields any. So, you know, with this, you know, we know that pre-tassel nitrogen has given us yield benefits, but do we really need to put it out there? I would rather see we manage for optimum nitrogen early in the season so that plant is set up. Having to rely on it later really makes it much more difficult to manage. You know, we've always had farmers that wanted to fly low spots in the field. So we've told them if it makes you feel good, go ahead and do it. Well, here's the data said that there's probably some definite benefit to doing that. You know, we've got a lot of other research that's underway looking at some of the different things about trying to work on growing degree days. If you heard some of the talks this morning talking about gearing things towards growing degree days, that's one of the things we're going to try to look at. This may not work on all soils. You know, some of these soils, on the sandy soils, we may not see the same time of response that we get on these silty loam soils. So with that, I'm going to stop. I know we're out.